Okay, this week we're looking at the what have been traditionally called the Aristotelian categories. Now, as you've probably noticed over the course of these past few lectures, we've moved away from obviously not necessarily away from logic, but from more of the, to use this term very loosely, quote unquote, structural concerns, which I should say, of logic. And now we're kind of looking at, again, as the syllabus implies, some of those background assumptions, some of those philosophical assumptions, presuppositions that we've been building our study of logic on, which is, of course, why philosophy and metaphysics, even epistemology, and as well as you've heard, natures and essences, universals, all those things have become so important in the last few weeks, because these are the things that we're taking for granted when we discuss logic, when we talk about logic, when we construct our syllogisms, when we talk about our terms, when we talk about our judgments between those terms, how they relate to one another. Are we comparing things that really do exist, i.e. universals, natures, and essences, or just things that we've made up, aka nominalism? So you see how a lot of these background assumptions, these background philosophical predispositions or presuppositions, I should say, come really to play in our discussion of and outworking of logic itself. So today what we're going to look at, and we're not going to go super in depth here, because this honestly is one of the most difficult aspects of Aristotelian logic. Not difficult in the sense that you can't figure it out, but difficult to unpack just everything that is entailed by these Aristotelian categories. There's two key, by the way, let me go ahead and say this before I forget. I have some in the recommended reading section. There's a video that I have posted there by a guy named Gregory Sadler. If you have time, check that video out. He's got some pretty good insights if you want to go a little more in depth in regards to these Aristotelian categories. Now, having said that, and again, while we're covering this to begin with, it's just because this is kind of going lock, stock, and barrel, hand in hand with traditional Aristotelian logic. But you don't necessarily have to understand, really, you don't even have to be aware of these, strictly speaking, in order to come as far as you have in this course, to be able to understand logic, to be able to go through your terms, put together your syllogisms, evaluate them by the Aristotelian rules, to check and not check for, or to check for informal fallacies and see if they're not, or if they are there or if they're not there. I'll get it out in a minute. So again, you don't really even have to be aware of these categories, but we want to at least familiarize you with them. If for no other reason, because these have gone lock, stock, and barrel with Aristotelian logic. Now, again, like I was saying before we got on my little soapbox rabbit trail, so to speak, there, I really want to concentrate on two key sentences, because again, the whole backdrop of what we've been discussing for the past few weeks is everything that we've taken for granted that allows us to do this sort of logic, that allows us to do logic, that allows us to reason, to hold real and rational discussions about the real, about objective reality. That is not something that we just ourselves are creating. So Aristotle, these categories, what he essentially wants to argue is that everything that is real is going to fall into or relate to something else in regards to these categories. So our two sentences here. If categories, this is going to be about midway down page 54. If categories categorized only subjective thoughts and not objective things, then those categorized thoughts would not correspond to anything, really. So he says, then we could never be sure of the objective truth of our judgments that used these categories. But all judgments use categories. So again, just to highlight, he's just trying to say that for Aristotle, if something really was real, and again, not something that's just created in our mind, then these categories are going to be applicable in some sense to real, quote unquote, real things. Now, let's look at this second sentence. Let's look at this. If reality is ordered and not chaotic, categories constitute one of its most basic kinds of order. I'll say that again because that's worth just kind of meditating on for a second. If reality is ordered and not chaotic, categories constitute one of its most basic kinds of order. Meaning that for Aristotle and for Christians, obviously for Aquinas, reality was not only knowable, but it made sense. Reality makes sense it's objective in the sense that it's not just dependent on us, and it makes sense. It's ordered. Well, why would this be key for Aristotle, Christians, and of course even Aquinas? Well, because God, if he is the author of reality, is not chaotic, is not out of order, is not haphazard or random. So it would only make sense that if that's true, then these categories would be true as well, meaning that they give shape to use this loosely here, give shape to the structure of reality. So in other words, these categories couldn't be just trivial. And of course, Kreft says, of course, there are arbitrary or trivial categories that we do make, such as his little humorous example, those things that smell worse than a dead yak. But he says, but there also must be these real sorts of categories that are reflective of the order of God himself in creating reality. So Aristotle had about 10 of these, and these have been refined over the years. I think Criff says something like maybe one or two, maybe not necessarily being as fundamental as Aristotle thought, but for the most part, all of them are, he believes, are dead on, so to speak, or that Aristotle is dead on in his going through these categories and how things are in reality. So let's look at those first. So one, substance, and of course the substance is just some sort of individual thing, something that just is, like a man. Criff says his examples: man, horse, but of course anything, tree, pillow, blanket, shoe, anything that just exists by itself in that sense. Two, quantity, how much? Obviously quantity deals with number in that sense. Three, quality. And of course, anytime we qualify a statement, it means that we're saying something substantial about it. So in that related sense, it's just the kind of thing. So if someone says, qualify what you mean by that, well, you go into depth about what it is that sets it apart. Well, not what it is, that would just be substance, but what kind of whatever it is that you're talking about, right? So Chris' example, it's white, or it's grammatical, or it's this or that, or whatever. So four, there's relation. That is obviously just how it's related to something. Place, where is the thing? Where? Time, obviously when, now, day before yesterday, tomorrow, so on. Posture. Now, Greff says here, the internal order of a thing's parts. Now, that can be cashed out in a few different ways, but just to stick to a simpler example, is a more simple example of reclining or standing or lying or whatever the case may be in that regard. But strictly speaking, how is the thing ordered itself? Because obviously a chair in some sense has posture, but it's not reclining or standing in the same way a man, say, would. Possession, to be equipped, when it's shod or armed or clothed or something of that nature. Action, basically just what is it doing, the act that it's in performance of. Even if it's not, it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be, say, for instance, a man. The act doesn't have to be he's running. He could just be standing, of course, and sometimes you see where some of these are almost confusing in the sense where they may overlap. So for instance, with that one, would that really fit in more with posture, or would that really fit in more with action? Because in one sense, obviously standing is an action. It's not, and yes, I use a double negative there. Sometimes that happens here in philosophy or logic. Standing is not doing something, right? It is doing something. So that is an action in some sense. But at the same time, that might relate to posture there. So you have to keep that kind of stuff in mind. So, and then the last one would be passion, being acted upon. What is happening to the thing in question? Greff says to receive. His example is the thing is cut, or it's burned, or it's, again, what is happening to the thing itself. So you've got a few exercises here, and these really start to, when you go through these exercises, they really start to help cash out what this actually means here. But again, I don't want you to become too bogged down with this again, because obviously if you've made it this far in the course, then you know how to do the nuts and the bolts of logic. You're ready to, so to speak, go out and use the discipline in the service of truth and reason and hopefully for the kingdom. You're ready to do that. Of course, with if you've gotten this far, even with more practice, no doubt, the more you do this kind of stuff, the better you get at it. It's still beneficial to at least have some sort of, at least cursory knowledge of something like the categories here. And again, why? Well, because Aristotle, Aquinas, of course, Christians in general believe obviously that God is the creator of reality. Reality is not chaotic. There really is order, structure, and hence categories to reality. These things are real, and these are sort of the basic assumptions, basic presuppositions that we're using in order to get the whole discipline, the whole ship, the whole machine, the whole tool of logic going at the onset. if we want to describe objective, real reality, not something that just we've made up, or something that's arbitrary or completely and totally subjective, but that we're trying to get to the real. And these are sort of what we've been talking about the past few weeks, are sort of the assumptions, the background that this tool is built on. It's trying to get us in touch with the real, in some sense, the outside, the objective world. So with that said, again, check out the link there if you want to really look in a little more depth here. Gregory Sadler's got some interesting stuff. Next week should be just kind of a preparation, going over some of your material in order for you to take your cumulative exam or test. Which again, if you made it this far, won't be that difficult. You'll be familiar with those concepts. It should just be composed of everything that you've gone through up to this point. I hope you've enjoyed this far. I hope that you've already been able to apply a lot of this stuff, whether it be on social media or in conversations with friends or just in your own thinking, to help clarify your own thinking on matters. Maybe clean out some of those messy ideas that you've had, and maybe clarify or sharpen or hone or clean up some of your own thoughts about some issues. So with that said, see you next time. Again, if you want to, check out the link.